Welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 AM News Talk Radio. Every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock, I have the opportunity to bring you interviews with interesting people. Alex Vezina, the CEO of Prepared Canada Corporation, has been on our show, I think, 2 or 3 times before. Alex is a emergency preparedness expert. He's got an undergraduate and a graduate degree in emergency preparedness. And he's studied epidemics in the past, emergency needs and what we need to do. And he's got a bunch of interesting analyses, both from a practical standpoint, because he's in the market, helping companies and people deal with the situation, but also he's got a fascinating academic historical view based on his studies. And so it's a pleasure to welcome Alex Vezina back to my show. Hey, Alex, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing, all things considered?
Very well. Thank you, all things considered. We're chatting via Zoom from your house and my house, I presume. My house, I presume. You've got a fancy new backdrop, but I presume this is
I've got a $15 green screen that's doing okay. So yeah.
Fantastic. So what we thought we'd do today is answer a bunch of questions because both Alex and I have had a bunch of questions sent in to us. And I thought that we'd go through some of those questions. And the first one, Alex, was about whether we should have hand washing stations installed in grocery stores and all around the world so that people wash their hands more frequently. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, so I think installing hand washing stations everywhere may be a good idea, but it's a question of not whether it's a good thing. I think everyone would agree that making it easier to wash your hands is probably a good thing. It's a matter of making it practical. So in other places where they have them, in hospitals and anywhere in pharmaceutical industry, in public hand washing stations in malls, which are mostly now closed. You have them already, but they've run the water there. So if you want to put a hand washing station in a grocery store towards the entrance, because ideally when people leave our entry, you'd want it to be done there. It's a question of whether or not you can actually run the water there and whether or not you could run that type of renovation while everyone's using it. But if you could practically do it, which you may be able to in many locations, yeah. Although there is also a concern that there may be a lineup to wash your hands depending on how much people want to wash their hands in the public. And if that is true and people start not social distancing the way they need to in a line, you could have people coughing on each other, getting infected in the lineup to wash their hands. So you'd have to work it out and handle some of the logistics around it. But yeah, in principle, that sounds like an interesting idea. And it's not a question that I think anyone's heard much, but you need to hear more comments and questions like these, because we're hearing a lot of the same stuff and not a lot of really interesting innovation stuff in the news as much as we might like to hear.
Now, downtown in the office buildings, even before COVID-19, you saw a lot of the hand sanitizer, little electronically operated hand sanitizing units. A lot of them are out of liquid, and so therefore not very helpful. But what about just having a lot more electronically operated hand sanitizing units at the opening to almost every retail establishment or store or anything?
That could help. Hand sanitizing isn't the same as washing your hands, and that's another thing that I've heard a lot of people talk about or think is true, especially weeks ago. Many people were saying, I sanitized my hands, so I'm fine, or I've put some hand sanitizer on, so I'm good. There are components of washing your hands that does more than what hand sanitizer can. It's one of the reasons why when you sterilize medical equipment, there is almost always, if not always, a step that involves soap, water, and good old elbow grease, being a lot of physical effort to scrub the stuff off, which is what you're doing with your hands essentially when you're washing them. Spraying something on my hands to help kill the bacteria on my hands is very different from aggressively using abrasion to wipe the thing off. So yes, it would be nice to have more hand sanitizing stations, but I would caution people, it doesn't replace washing your hands.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to take a break for messages and come back with some more questions with Alex Vezina in just a minute. Stay with us. Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960 AM News Talk Radio. We're chatting with the CEO of Prepared Canada Corporation, Alex Vezina. We just talked about washing hands and hand sanitizing. The other thing that's really come up, Alex, of late is this idea of everyone wearing a mask. The President of the United States came out and changed his tune and recommended people other than him. He said he wouldn't wear one in the Oval Office, that it was inappropriate, I guess, but that he thought other people should be wearing or could be wearing masks. It was a recommendation, but not an instruction. But the interesting thing is that I think people think that by wearing a mask, they're protecting themselves from others. And in fact, I think what you've said in the past is really what a mask is doing is protecting other people from an infected person or a potentially infected person. Is that correct?
Yes. And I want to also, this is going to involve some more disaster management theory that in practice has been proven true more often than not. I'm going to bring something in and talk about that in a moment. But in general, yes, when you wear a mask, you're protecting everyone else from you. If you were sprayed in the face by an alcohol spray or any sort of spraying thing, and you were wearing a mask, you would still get some around your eyes and you get some around your face. The mask doesn't protect you from everything. The same way as if someone's beside you and they cough on you, it doesn't really matter much if you're wearing the mask if it gets everywhere around the mask. On talking about this, wear the mask recommendation, I want to caution people with something, and not everyone's going to like what I say here, but there's a reason for it, and I want to give you some context around this. Telling everyone to wear a mask when they go outside may have the effect of actually increasing the spread of this.
What?
And may have the it may have the effect of increasing the spread of this.
Why?
And it may have the effect of increasing the danger. And this has to do with how safety equipment works and the way safety initiatives and safety things being put in place work. Whenever you put something, a safety measure in place, what ends up happening is people go back to what their normal level of comfortable risk is. So for example, you put an extra advanced braking system in a car that lets you brake closer to the person's bumper safely. People will brake closer than they did previously because the thing has been installed in their car, because the thing lets them do it. So their behavior will change because of the safety measure to a more risky behavior, because they're comfortable with that safety measure being more risky.
Right.
People always reset or tend to go towards the level of risk that they're comfortable with or their risk tolerance acceptable level. This happens with everything. The way this ties into masks specifically is people are, not everyone, but some people are hearing, and this isn't what the government said, but this is what they're hearing. They're hearing, because I have a mask on, I'm safe when I go outside. And because they hear that, they're going outside more often than if they just didn't have a mask. So they're assuming mask equals safety when it doesn't equal safety. Mask equals safer, but it doesn't mean that you take more risks and go outside more often and increase your chance of exposure, which is what some people are doing. It's being misinterpreted that way. And that's why I caution.
The line about seatbelts, the people actually drive faster when they have seatbelts on, take more risks.
Yeah. Of course. And any safety measure, you see it a lot in transportation. Transportation ends up being something that everyone does and people are familiar with. But any safety measure that affects someone's personal risk, they always, in virtually every case, consciously or not, change their behavior to be more and more risky. The reverse is also true, and this is a bit out there and draconian, but when you're doing disaster management academic stuff, you'll hear interesting things. There was I believe it was theoretical, but I think they used like a plastic one, but they told them, or like a foam one, but they told them it was true. They put a really big spike in the middle of the steering wheel and told the people that if they were in an injury, if they were in an accident, it would impale them. And it was fake and it was foam, but people were so afraid of being impaled, everyone drove safely. So it was so risky to drive, they behaved safer. So people always reset to their safe level of risk every time, if you make it safer or not safer.
Okay. I understand the concept. So what does this mean?
Yeah.
Saying don't wear a mask or still wear a mask, but don't go out?
So what I'm saying is people should behave the way they would if they didn't have a mask. So
Gotcha.
If you aren't comfortable going out without a mask on, don't go out with a mask on. Don't go out at all. If you are going to go out, regardless of if you have a mask or not, then yes, wear the mask. But don't assume.
The mask doesn't necessarily save you from someone else
doesn't.
Sick.
It doesn't. Further, some people also
coughing on someone else.
Yes. Further, also, some people when they're outside, and there's a whole bunch of stuff around masks. Some people when they're outside, because they're wearing a mask, feel that they can violate social distancing and talk to someone right beside them. So they say, okay, I'm wearing a mask, so 2 meters, who cares? and they just talk right beside someone with a mask on, which defeats the purpose of wearing the mask. Like, you're behaving more risky. Don't do that.
Right.
If you're doing something you wouldn't do without a mask on, don't.
The other thing that you've said in the past is that people too often play with the masks constantly.
Yeah. So I was just going to get to that. People touch their face all the time. But when you wear a mask, you touch your face more because you have to, because you're playing with the mask. Very, very often what people will do is, and you'll see this, people with a mask down here, people who take it off partially, put it back on. When you're doing that, your finger brushes back here very often, and it goes and takes it off your ear. Most people, they do the brush nearby their eye, at which point you've introduced possibly infected material beside your eye, defeating the purpose of wearing protective equipment on your head. Same thing with people wearing PPE and goggles. People take the goggles off and then put the goggles back on. You see this in construction. You see this in almost every sector that has large amounts of PPE. It's not a personal protective equipment. It's not comfortable, and people mess with it. And sometimes messing with it does more harm than good, depending on what it is.
Right.
So what you should do if you're going to put on a mask and if you're going to wear gloves is, before you leave the house, you wash your hands, you sterilize everything, you make sure that you're good. Okay, put your mask on. Then put your gloves on, keep it on indefinitely until you get home. When you get home, take off your gloves first, then wash your hands and sterilize everything, then take off your mask, and then wash your hands again, probably, because you just touched the mask. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. You know, it's interesting because everyone's been talking about masks and washing hands and things like that. I have been worked in the pharmaceutical industry, as you know, in the past. And when you go in and out of a clean room, for an example, often there is a barrier, so you've gone through the doors, but then there's a barrier in the hallway where you have to remove absolutely everything on one side of the barrier, like a bench. Mm-hmm. And then you sit down and you swivel over the bench and put on your new outside shoes and wash your hands. And so therefore you're taking off your protective equipment, your mask, your face mask, your goggles, etc., and leaving it on one side of the bench, and then you're getting into your street clothes or your inside house clothes on the other side. And so, I think what regrettably people are doing is they're taking the mask into their house, they're reusing their mask, they're reusing their gloves, they're taking their masks into their house, and so therefore, if they've got germs all over their mask and their gloves, they're just bringing that into the house.
Oh, no, it gets better. It gets even better than that. And I mean better sarcastically, as in it gets worse. But people will take their masks, they'll blow into them to blow the mask up so they can fit their hand in. And if this is someone who's infected, you've just infected the whole glove. Then they put their hand in the glove, and then they go out and do whatever touching things with the glove that is now from their breath. And then later on, they take off their glove in a way where they want to reuse it while in the store, at which point you've defeated the purpose of wearing a glove. There's ways to put on and take off gloves that medical staff are trained on that you can pretty easily find on Google. And for those of you who can't, I'm filming a bunch of videos, and I'm going to be posting up a bunch of videos on how to wash your hands and how to take off gloves and how to do all this, because I haven't seen it enough. And I'm going to try to get it as much media as I can for people, because this stuff should be known if you wear it. Anyways, people have very counterproductive behaviors with the safety equipment, to the point where one would question whether they should be wearing it at all, because they're doing things, these risky behaviors that I'm talking about, that just are so disproportionately risky. If you were just not wearing the mask and not wearing the gloves and afraid to touch anything, then you wouldn't be touching anything. Or if you just didn't leave your house, you wouldn't have left your house in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I got another question. A lot of people have been asking about pet stores. Pet stores closing?
Yeah, so actually pet stores and marijuana stores. And actually these have almost the same answer. They're slightly different. So I'm actually going to do marijuana stores first, because it's very close to the LCBO alcohol store argument, which we talked about before. The reason the LCBO was open is because you have people who are alcoholics who you can't have put burden on the medical system while we have other burdens from the medical system like COVID. There is a second reason why we have LCBO stores open. It's because it takes people out of the grocery stores. So instead of having Infection Central being a grocery store where everyone has to go, and if there's an outbreak, everyone's going to get it because everyone's in it, you take some of those people out of the grocery stores where they would buy their alcohol, and you put them in the LCBO. The Marijuana stores are different but interesting. While we don't sell marijuana in grocery stores, we, society, do sell it illegally via the black market on the street. And when you don't have access to the thing that you want, you will find a way to get it. And unfortunately, drug dealers are not very interested in being tracked by the government for transmission, and drug dealers are not very interested in throwing you the drugs and having you throw them the cash, generally speaking. So there's a lot of hand-to-hand exchange, generally speaking, with a lot of drug deals, which is not very good for public health and transmission, and people want their marijuana. And when there is a cluster from one, it becomes incredibly difficult to track for public health. So I'm looking at the closure of marijuana stores as a public health risk, because we're going to spread and transmission. Okay, that's marijuana.
Do you think that closing marijuana stores is a mistake?
Categorically. If we're closing marijuana stores and we're closing pet stores, we should be closing grocery stores and everything, have the military in the streets, and be giving people rations. Once you start closing amenities, you should just close everything for the 2 weeks with a severe lockdown, the stuff that I talked about a month ago, and just kill the virus in its tracks. Just lock down society.
But if we're going to keep grocery stores and pharmacies open, you would argue keep pet stores and marijuana stores open.
Yes, because otherwise just have the military distribute everything.
What's the rationale for pet stores?
Okay, the rationale for pet stores is pets are family, and if I can't feed my pet dies. And when people are already worried about stress and worried about what I'm going to do, are you going to tell me that a vet is a non-essential service? Because pretty soon, if pet stores are, why aren't vets? Like, it's a slippery slope when we're looking at what is essential, what is non-essential. And the fact of the matter is, and we learned this in Haiti with the Haitian earthquake in 2010, pets are family. The mental health impact of telling people that they cannot help their pets or feed their pets is the same thing as I can't feed my family. It is a very, very bad idea. And people will say, oh, but there's pet food in grocery stores. Yes, for birds, dogs, and cats. Not for everything else, generally speaking. And if you have a pet with a pre-existing condition that requires a certain type of food, or they're having dietary problems all across your house or at risk of death, which is true for many pet owners, you need your pet store.
But it'll also go back to your argument about why push all the people that would have been going to pet stores into grocery stores. We're just making it in grocery stores.
Good, which is why they're related. So that is the other really important thing. If you have a business that is taking load off of the grocery store, but is still I go out, buy a bunch of stuff once and then leave style store, it takes load off the grocery stores, and it reduces the risk that you have to close a grocery store because it's now a source of COVID infection. So I personally disagree with strategies that put more people in a grocery store, because if everyone is going to the grocery store, someone among everyone is going to be infected, and you're just going to have everyone infected at the grocery store.
Okay, so let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Beautiful weekend, and every park and the walks down by the lake and things like that, there's been people, guards and security guards and police and stuff like that blocking it. And so people aren't out for a walk. And I would have thought we could have trusted people to walk 6 feet away from other people, but getting people out into nature and enjoying and staying healthy, I would have thought would have been important. And instead, what we're doing is we're closing all our parks up. Why does that make sense? Just because we think we...
Okay. So there's a whole bunch of different things that tie into this. The current state of what's going on in Canada, broadly speaking, has resulted in, I shouldn't say Canada, in Ontario and what we're hearing on the news. The current state is that you have two categories of people, generally speaking now. You have people who are panicking and afraid, which creates a panic and afraid problem, which we can get into dystopian futures if we want, but it creates people who do unreasonable things because they want to do anything to be safe. And then you have the people who don't recognize how severe the problem is. And both of these people create a different type of unique problem for decision makers. The category of people that don't think that this is a big enough problem are the people who aren't social distancing anyways, and the people who basically require Emergencies Act being enacted, martial law, military police in the streets. And if you're trying to stop it from spreading, the reality is that someone is going to not care unless you force them to care.
Okay, but by closing parks and waterfront walkways, all that it's going
You
to
have to
happen.
close
People are gonna walk on the
everything.
sidewalk.
You have to close the sidewalk. You don't
Right.
have a choice. If
So
you want to stop
we're
the
not
thing from
closing the
spreading,
sidewalk. Are we going to say you are not allowed to walk outside?
we're going to say you're not allowed to leave your house, period. Under penalty of pick a legislation we'll use or make and pass.
Okay, so we have not got that far yet.
No, but the point is that that's where it's trending if we're talking about locking everything down. And if
So you
they're doing
agree
what
with the closing down of parks?
I agreed with it 4 weeks ago, if you were talking about adopting the strategy of actually stopping the virus dead in its tracks before community transmission. I was saying 4 weeks ago that we should basically keep everyone in their house for 2 weeks and start handing out military rations and lock the whole country down, because otherwise it would be a practical waste of our time, which is where we're at right now, where it may or may not be a waste of time because everyone's going to get infected anyways, which is what we said 4 weeks ago.
Okay, so we're chatting with Alex Vezina, CEO of Prepared Canada. It's a little bit concerning, but we're going to take a break for messages and come back for some more questions in just a minute. Stay with us. Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting again with Alex Vezina, the CEO of Prepared Canada, an emergency preparedness company. And Alex is a emergency preparedness expert, someone that's studied in his schooling in both undergraduate and graduate degrees, pandemics and emergencies and safety and getting prepared for all of these things. You know, Alex, just before the break, you were talking about locking everyone down, not allowing them to leave their houses and passing out emergency rations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, doesn't this risk getting people into mass hysteria and panic?
It does. And that's one thing that actually I really wanted to talk about and caution people about. Statements like the one that I just made and things that you're hearing in the media, especially things that are not being verified, not being confirmed, all these random cures that we're saying that may or may not happen, and people interpreting the numbers that came out on the day when the Premier of Ontario basically said how many people could die. People are interpreting that in many cases as the end of days, and they're taking measures and they're reacting in ways that aren't helpful to themselves. And mass hysteria and mass panic can lead to a breakdown in society. It can lead into massive crime rates. It can lead into, frankly, effects that are worse than widespread coronavirus. And I'm not, and when you hear people say stuff like that, you usually hear it from far right-wing media in the States, where they think that coronavirus isn't a bad thing and that panic's really bad. What I'm talking about is if you let panic spread, it ends up being worse than losing 3 to 5% of your population, which is already a really, really bad thing. So people, and I mean, it's like almost like saying don't get panicked because being panicked is bad, and don't stop being panicked about being panicked, which is kind of strange to say. But you need to try to find a way to live your life as best as you can. You need to try to find a way to find some enjoyment in what you're doing, to find a way to connect with friends and do a lot of the stuff that they're talking about, maybe in different ways in the ways that they're talking about. But in some ways, it is critically important for people to keep themselves okay up here, because the effects of the entire population not being there are significantly worse than the effects of this type of virus as we know it right now. Now, does this mean that we all go break quarantine because we need to go to the movies? No, that's not what that means. What that means, though, is there are people that you are going to be able to go visit all the time. And this is something I like to call houses being linked. Many people have family members that they shop for. Many people have significant others that live at different residences than them. The reality is that if you and they live at different places and you only leave your house to go visit them, you have one house that's in two different locations. Both of your houses are linked because you're going to be visiting them, you're going to see them. There's nothing that you can do to basically stop that. If your elderly parents live at a different residence and they are completely dependent on you for groceries, you're going to visit them. What this means is if you have someone that you have to see all the time, you can see them. They can come over. You can go over there. But they're the only people that can. And if anyone involved in either household gets infected, everyone's in isolation in both houses because you're one house in two locations. And that isn't being said because people will take that as let's go throw a house party and quarantine the whole neighborhood, which is not the way that should be taken. But that's realistically what is going to happen. And if people think that way, then a lot of this fear of I have no one I can communicate with, I'm alone and isolated, etc., gets lessened. Because frankly, if you can find one friend that you said, you know what, if we get infected, we get infected together and it's only us, a lot of this concern goes away and you don't have the house parties. So that's one thing that I'd like to talk about, or like to think about recommending to people to think about, because you gotta be okay up here.
And being okay up here means that you can connect with loved ones, even if they're in another house, but don't interact with people beyond those two houses.
Exactly. But and remember, if anyone in either house in that case gets infected, both houses are on isolation, because you assume it's one house at that point.
Right. Okay. What are some of the other questions you've been asked?
Oh, yeah, quite a few. We covered marijuana stores. We covered pet stores. So this is a bit out of left field. Someone asked what I thought and what we were thinking about Canada's response versus the United States' response.
Yep.
And how well we're doing, all things considered, which I thought was interesting. Most people would agree that Donald Trump is not doing a great job.
Yep.
That's the understatement of the century. Most people, I think, would also agree that Canada is doing okay, at least. Whether it's doing well or not, I think, is a question for history. But I think Canada versus the U.S., depending on the United States, depending on the state, is uniquely positioned as a more militarized society to really lock things down. So depending on the state, I think they may be doing better than some parts of Canada on a state-by-state basis in terms of actually implementing the lockdown when they do it. On the total, though, Canada, I think, is overall doing better, but there's also a question of we have smaller population, greater area, lower population density. It's harder for it to spread in Canada in general.
We really have lower population density. So, 90% of Canadians live within 100 miles of the U.S. border. We've got 3 to 6 major cities across Canada where the vast majority of our population live. And so, I think most people have said even though we've got a big country and there's part of us that are pretty rural, if not completely vacant, the vast majority of Canadians, 90% of us, live in concentrated urban environments close to the U.S. border. And that said, so far, if you take a look at the per capita numbers, we're 1/10 the size of the United States. We're 1/25 of them right now in cases. So that would suggest that we're doing a better job. Now, my concern is that it started in North America, in New York City. And so therefore maybe, the numbers in the United States are skewed by how densely urban New York is, and that New York, became the hotspot before most of the United States, most of New York, in fact, could react. And I fear that a lot of what's happened in the United States is comparable to what people have talked about in Italy, where, they closed down northern Italy, but what ended up happening is people from northern Italy, from Milan, spread across Italy and took the infection back to their hometowns in southern Italy, central Italy, South Italy, Sicily, etc. You've seen that a lot of the tracks of community spread in Long Island, in New Jersey, in Connecticut, etc., have come from people that were previously in New York. And so that makes logical sense. So
right.
far,
I mean, that ties into what I was saying, though.
But the question is, will we remain doing better than the United States from a per capita standpoint?
Yeah. So on that question, and that leads into really what I was going to get to, which is questioning the question in of itself. Canada and the U.S. are so interlinked, anyways. And so much of our food transportation, frankly, is dependent on things going between our borders. It doesn't really make, it makes a difference, but it doesn't make a massive difference which one of us is doing it better than the other, unless the other is going to adopt the same strategy and go along with us. Because whoever is doing the job worse is going to affect the other one with its inability to adapt the situation. So even if we are one of the best countries in the world at handling this, which at this point I wouldn't say that we are, because we did it later than other countries like Korea. Even though we are, we may be doing it better than the U.S. by most measures right now, the fact of the matter is, if they drop the ball, they're coming across the border when they're delivering food, and we're going to have infection impacted and influenced by their inability to control it
later on,
or frankly during, but because we're just going to have extra vectors. One thing that I actually, it wasn't in the questions, but I thought about, I wanted to see automotive companies start looking into automated trucks and drone trucks and stopping people from coming across the border really fast. I thought that there was an interesting thing there where you could have transportation companies trying to get ahead of the curve and kind of retool their system to not having drivers, which is going to really, really irritate truck drivers, but which fair enough. But in this type of environment, the same way that education has now gone into online, and that was something that we didn't like very much previously, the necessity of having cross-border transportation being automated, I now think is actually something that I haven't seen a lot of, that we should be looking at very seriously, because that lets us basically stop that transmission vector.
Sounds like you're going to want to put up a wall like Trump. We should be putting up a wall.
Well, we have a border and we have the Quarantine Act, which is a legislative wall, but why would you need a physical one? It's hard for trucks to drive through a wall on the regular. So no, but we already have one via having a border, so sure.
So what do you think of this Trump directive for 3M to not ship masks to Canada?
Well, I think that's an economic decision. Personally, I think that one of the things that we haven't talked much about seriously in this country is the economic impact, because it scares people. People who make decisions, it likely scares more than the coronavirus in terms of the death numbers, even the large ones. It does. And I think that Canada is going to have a serious financial problem in a few months, if it doesn't have one already. But when people really see what's going on with its with buying power. So I think that is probably an economic decision. It might also be a panicked expediency decision where they want to say, hey, let's not let anything leave our country. I think that one thing that we should be looking at is a lot of the things that we manufacture overseas, that Canadian companies manufacture overseas. We need to look at manufacturing them here, because we may have a situation coming up in the next few months where the companies that, or the countries where those factories are housed, don't let them leave their country and they just take them. Yeah. So masks that are made overseas, etc. You've heard talk about basically nationalizing all industry from Premier Ford recently, from the whole, we can make anything here, we have the people, we have the resources, we have the space, etc., to make everything here, which is basically talking about nationalizing everything. So we may have to take a serious look at what that looks like, and the pros and cons of widespread manufacturing and economic nationalism, which there are some serious concerns there. But I think that is a serious concern that's incoming, and is related to, frankly, why everyone's holding on to their stuff and saying, I'm not trading unless it's to my benefit. I need these now. It's not leaving my country. So
what you're really relaying is this potential concern that the global trading order that we've had for the last 30, 50 years is in question.
Well, the question that globalization is over, which is a scary notion, right? Like that is a serious shift, and you are very financially minded, right? So the idea that, like, what does the world look like post globalization when all of the major, or most of the major countries that have been put into economic, for lack of a better word, destitution, or economic trouble, are forced to basically nationalize everything and only build everything at home because they can't buy on the market. Like, that is not necessarily what's going to happen, but something that should be thought about as a potential thing that could happen.
Well, Alex Vezina, you've raised a bunch of good questions. And
stop panicking. Don't panic. Actually, you know what? Before you that, one thing I want to say. The last thing that I just said, and some of the things that I've said are problems that are outside of most people's control. Okay, like an individual, unless they're the prime minister or a minister of this country, is not going to have the ability, generally speaking, to impact the global economy. At the end of the day, no matter what happens, someone's going to figure out a way for people to work and survive because they have to. So the individual will get through this, and the person making the decisions in Ottawa is going to lose all their hair from stress. But
Well,
the individual will get through this.
you relayed to me last week that the Minister of Finance in Germany committed suicide because he was having so much difficulty dealing with the stress of the situation.
Yes, and frankly, Canada is a country that takes care of its people, generally speaking. And yes, we have unemployment issues, and yes, we haven't taken care of our homeless. However, John Tory actually put them in hotels, which I thought was nice, because for one of the first times ever in a Western country, we actually didn't leave our homeless to die, which was like surprising. In a good way, obviously, right? So, but we actually take care of our people. And in the Philippines, Duterte is doing what Duterte does, where he shoots people in the head when they break quarantine. And we're not doing that here because we actually care about people and we don't do stuff like that. So Canada is unique in that it actually cares about human life, which is not a trait that every country believes in.
Alex Vezina, CEO of Prepared Canada. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us.
Sure. I like talking to Brian. Brian's a great guy.
Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 AM News Talk Radio. We're chatting tonight with Alex Vezina, the CEO of Prepared Canada Corp. He's an emergency preparedness expert. Alex, Queen Elizabeth came out for the 5th time in her reign and made a statement that effectively said, we're going to get through this and we're going to get through this all together. I thought it was kind of interesting that, and her own son has been diagnosed with coronavirus, and her prime minister has not only been diagnosed with coronaviruses, but been admitted to hospital for treatment. Pretty impressive that the Queen comes out and makes a statement for only the 5th time in her reign.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry. It's probably a testament to my age. I feel that if she didn't come out and give a statement during a time like this, I mean, when was she? Like, really? This is being touted as the equivalent event to this generation's version of a world war, right? This is when great leaders come out and say great things. Yeah. Sorry, I focus a lot more.
It was about time that you come out and say great things.
Sure, but I mean, it doesn't change my day to day, and I'm still more concerned about making sure that everyone's able to feel safe and happy and healthy at home with food, which she contributes.
I thought it was a very good statement, and you and I have talked about Andrew Cuomo and quoting FDR and people like that. I think the statement today will actually go down in history of one of the most important statements from a monarch. But I'm a monarchist anyway. So Alex Vezina, we've talked about what leaders should do. We've talked about what public health people should be doing. What can just regular everyday people do in this situation? They can't change global trade. They can't change. They can't change what everyone else is doing, whether they're walking out in parks or social distancing. What can individuals and what should individuals and families be doing?
Okay, so we talked about looking at risky behavior and not luring yourself kind of into a false sense of safety and doing more risky things than you've done before. So that's one thing that they can do. Thinking about when you're wearing your mask, when you're wearing your gloves, if you're doing it as you should, informing yourself, number one. Number two, people should put the news into context. Most of the people that I talk to that are very, very stressed out, listen to the news way too often in their day and think about it for the whole day, and they've forgotten how to live their life. Their life is now coronavirus, and your life isn't coronavirus. The coronavirus is a big part of the news cycle and is a thing, and it's going to impact your ability to leave your house maybe, but your life isn't coronavirus. Your life is your family, your life is your work or future potential work, because I know that that's changing, but your life is what you like to do around you. Okay, your life doesn't have to be all consumed by coronavirus news, and that's difficult to say, but it's not all consumed by it. People need to try to focus on what matters to them, frankly. The people that I see doing well are the ones who, this one was actually pretty interesting. A relative of mine coated their whole house in those like square puzzle piece foam things. He has very young kids, and they played a whole house board game where like the one color was good square, and then the other color was bad square, and then the other color was you can't step on it square, and you had to walk around, and like just really, really innovative, fun game stuff for kids, right? So just find a way to have fun and pass your time. And yes, that is something that generally people who only have resources or are in a place of privilege, luxury, who have financial ability can do that. But if you have the means to enjoy yourself at home and come up with something, focus on that. Try to be innovative. If you were put out of work and you always wanted to start up a company, and you qualify for the emergency benefit, and you don't see yourself getting a job in your industry, and you have $2,000 a month and a bunch of time for research and development, go come up with a new idea right now. Put your thoughts and your power into that. Try to be productive with the unfortunate free time you've given, and don't focus so much on why you've been given the free time. And frankly, if you hear something about a cure for coronavirus, if you hear something about some magical thing that's going to save you, unless it's the World Health Organization saying it, it's probably BS. So no, you don't have to go buy a machine that checks your oxygen levels in your blood. You don't need to go buy a bunch of medications that people need to survive for lupus so that they don't get it and their life is in danger and then overdose on it yourself. Just stop trying to cure yourself when the entire medical industry is doing it for you, and focus on making your kids not scared out of their mind because you're so stressed and ending up with post-traumatic stress disorder in 10 years. Like, just focus on what matters to you and not on doing the job of the World Health Organization.
Alex Vezina, CEO of Prepared Canada. Great advice. We're going to take a last break and come back with a couple of concluding comments. Stay with us.
Still nice closing with Brian. Closing with Brian is great.
Well, we're back for a couple of final comments. This is Brian Crombie on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We've been interviewing Alex Vezina, the CEO of Prepared Canada Corporation, and his website, if you need any advice, is what? Alex, preparedcanada.ca?
Prepared.ca.
Prepared.ca.
Yes.
And Alex has got a bunch of good advice on his website, and he's going to be putting up some videos with some instructions on how to wash your hands and how to put on PPE and stuff like that. So I commend Alex and his website, prepared.ca, to you. I think Alex has got some pretty good advice, and that is to get on with your life. And, Amazon, Jeff Bezos came on with a big article I guess it was like a week or 10 days ago. And he said that companies that are going to be successful in this situation are going to be ones that think about how they can make money, how they can find a future in this current situation. And those that just hunker down and wait it out probably aren't going to be overly successful. And we got to think about how we live in the today's environment. And you, Alex, have mentioned things like autonomous trucks or ways drones might be able to help. And I think that's a good idea. So we've got to think about our companies and our businesses and how we can be successful. And Alex has also related that families and people have got to be thinking that itself. And I do think that having this time where you're stuck at home, whether it's by yourself or with your loved ones, gives you an opportunity to give some thought to your future, give some thought to what's important in life, gives you some time to do those jigsaw puzzles, clean up the house, organize your finances, do some of those things that we just never have enough time in our busy lives to do. Read a book, do a degree online, do some instructions.
You could never take
some symphonies. There's so many wonderful things that you can do with this time off. Whether it's time off from work or whether it's just a little bit of time at home. It's certainly time that you're saving commuting. So figure out how you can reinvent your day-to-day life to be more successful and more rewarding in our current environment. And just don't watch the news and wait it out. Anyway, that's my advice for the day. Alex, thanks for joining us. Join us tomorrow, every Monday through Friday, 6 o'clock on 960 AM or saga960am.ca, or check out my podcasts and videos online. Thanks very much. Good night.